6 years of development, over double the budget of Borderlands 3, arguably more controversy before launch, thanks to doubts about its pricing. Ladies and gentlemen, Borderlands 4. Given the backlash against the threequel story and characters, all eyes are on Gearbox to set up and revitalize the franchise that put looter shooters on the map. After about 60 hours or so and reaching Ultimate Vault Hunter mode Tier 5, I'm happy to report that we've succeeded. For the most part, our story begins, as they all do, on a planet embroiled in mayhem, even as Order threatens to overwhelm all. A clean slate. Kairos is in somewhat of an uprising against the Timekeeper, which is a nice way of saying that everyone has their own pockets of resistance with little to no impact. As the Vault Hunter, be it Vex, Rafa, Amon, or Harlow, you're someone captured and bolted by the Order due to the predisposition to chaos. It's only with the help of the Crimson Resistance that you escape, though ultimately it's Echo 4 that keeps the Timekeeper from taking control, Harbinger style. You'll meet up with some returning characters like Claptrap, Amara, Zane, and Moxie, and they're as you might remember them, just far less grating. The newcomers take on important roles, and thankfully they're substantial enough to warrant some interest. Rush of the Outlanders comes across as positivity incarnate, but can get emotionally bogged down. Defiant Calder carries on the fight against the Order, despite effectively being outlawed by the Augurs. Levane, as developed as she is, owing to her history with Zane, is probably the weakest character-wise, but her socialite attempting to adjust to the Badlands antics can be amusing. Other characters inevitably pop up, and for what it's worth, not a single one drove me to mute voiceovers in the settings. It isn't to say that there aren't corny lines or somewhat forced memes, and while I liked being able to approach main missions in just about any order, spending a few hours with a core group of characters and then moving on to the next region to temporarily forget about them felt off at times. There are also the usual plot holes, some even more egregious given what the Timekeeper is capable of, and the campaign missions still involve a lot of collect this, pull that switch, etc. Get used to the new grapple object and throw it at a thing mechanic. It will resurface, often. Notable exceptions abound, boarding a driller as it circles a Ripper encampment, or one particular set piece that may be the coolest in the franchise for as long as it lasts. But these are also punctuated by a lot of standing around, waiting for other characters to get their dialogue out as you follow them around. Running away while hearing them over the radio only works so much, unfortunately, but at least the cutscenes, wherever they may arise, are well made. The overwhelming impression from the campaign isn't just that Gearbox wants to move on from Borderlands 3, but also to establish this as somewhat of a new start. Yet, when some of the most interesting threads of the overarching narrative are featured, however briefly, the overwhelming gap between each release and how long it'll take to develop them further can leave a hardcore fan wanting. Brave New World. For quite some time, Gearbox has discussed the size and scale of Kairos, the seamless travel between zones, and the more dynamic nature of it all. With those Digirunners materializing wherever one pleases, it was difficult not to get a Destiny vibe from it all. However, this is perhaps the biggest step forward for the franchise, both in terms of immersion and gameplay. The novelty of seamlessly traversing from the Fade Fields and their lush plains, which fits with most inhabitants being former farmers, to the dusty reaches and barren wastes of Carcadia Burn is cool. Above all else though, Kairos feels alive. You won't just run into enemies patrolling about, muttering how this is good work when you can get it. Outlanders will be busy doing push-ups and doing Outlander things. Augurs will get into fights with wild animals or Order forces and sometimes reward you for helping out. The Order doesn't just randomly drop enemies in your wake, they have outposts which you can assail. Between the collectibles, unlockable safe houses, silos which allow for hunting vault fragments, contracts, and side activities like propaganda speakers or crawlers, there's a lot to do, and that's not even factoring in some of the side quests. Your mileage may vary, of course, but I liked the early murder mystery chain, cheesy CSI Miami one-liners and all. More than simply filling environments with stuff to do or to collect, Kairos encourages venturing out and discovering things. Yes, some of these activities aren't exactly the most inventive. Guardians who missed protecting Ghost while he hacks into a thing rejoice because that's back on the menu, but they all do work well enough. The crawlers are a great example. It's similar to climbing a tower in an old school Far Cry, except you also have to carry a battery to release some vent clamps for the shiny bauble. The twist is that you can't clamber or climb while carrying it, so some fancy throwing will be necessary on top of the traversal. These activities and many others award SDU, which expands your inventory slots, max ammo for each weapon type, and more, meaning that they're worth going out of your way for, but not mandatory. And about the compass, it's serviceable enough for getting around, but icons tend to overlap with one another. And while I didn't miss the minimap simply relying on the compass for finding enemies, it doesn't indicate their relative distance, which sometimes threw me off. There's a combat radar, but thankfully it didn't feel essential to slaying out. Skill trees on the Loot River. Of course, the narrative and world design are secondary to the real appeals of Borderlands: loot, and becoming a nigh unstoppable killing machine. Or a damage over time dealing edgelord who inflicts multiple negative statuses with phase specters and reapers while tossing singularity grenades. As a Siren aficionado, I spend all of my time on Vex, who specializes in minions and kinetic damage, but is just as capable of flexing to a solo lifesteal build or an elemental nightmare. And while you can only choose one action skill, different passives could be suited to different purposes. Found a really cool shield with no actual shield HP, but which provides health regen and damage reduction? Pair that with even more damage reduction and even more max health from Phase Familiar. Maybe you'd like some extra DOT to go with your DOT and cause critical hits from guns and skills to inflict bleed with the Incarnate tree, which pairs excellently with Dead Ringer's passive to apply another status effect on top of the original. That doesn't even account for the augments and capstones, whether you're spawning Reapers to provide some extra health regen with Coven, or using Banshee's Wail to reduce the damage dealt by enemies and gain some overshield as well. I stuck with Dead Ringer for the most part, because there's something great about leaving my Specters to shoot a bunch of enemies like an impromptu firing squad and running off to explore. And since her class passive is about attuning skill and melee damage to fit the element of her current weapon, you can generate minions to pile on specific elemental damage. Every choice feels impactful in different ways, and I haven't even fully embraced the tanking possibilities of Incarnate, especially when it comes to the new armor shields. That's not all that's new, thankfully. The Order's weapons can be charged, consuming more ammo to fire multiple shots at once. Daedalus allows for switching between two ammo types and even firing modes, offering an SMG/shotgun solution if you need it. And the Rippers follow the Beyblade model: hold down the trigger and let her rip in full auto. While that all sounds well and good, and each of these performs admirably enough, the real treat is obtaining weapons with parts from multiple manufacturers. You can obtain a Maliwan shotgun that swaps between two elementals with different spread patterns/projectiles, but they may fire in full auto after holding down the trigger thanks to a Ripper component, which actually synergizes well with Specialization passive. I found a legendary Daedalus SMG with burst fire that could melt armored core enemies with its corrosive element, but seeing those shots ricochet on crits to nearby foes because of the Jacobs part was even better. Having such a system is only part of the equation though. It wouldn't be Borderlands if there weren't some absurdity, and this thankfully delivers. Familiar wacky alternative firing modes like a thrown weapon that turns into a walking sentient gun return. But you also have railguns, flamethrowers, which are sadly more like spinning flame grenades, and shock fields. You can find an armor shield which breaks and unleashes missiles or increases damage based on missing armor segments, or a grenade that creates electric tethers, chaining to enemies for a duration. The result is a system that compels checking almost every drop, sometimes against your better judgment. Now, there are some disappointments, even though I am a little disappointed that some of them, Order Plus, a surprise returning manufacturer, don't result in the formal essentially stacking an insane number of shots, but it's not the biggest deal breaker. What can be worrisome is trying to manage all this loot, especially when you're constantly discarding lesser gear for upgrades during the campaign. For some reason, quick marking items as junk would sometimes result in the items 2 spaces above getting marked instead, thus necessitating the tried and true right click. At least there are numerous options for filtering between weapons, manufacturers, elements, and even equipped/unequipped, so if you just want to mark all unequipped items as junk in the backpack, go right ahead. The legendaries can be hit or miss, but that ultimately depends on your build. For every disappointing assault rifle that fired bullets in a triple spread vertically or horizontally, I found some incredible Maliwan shotguns that tore through packs. Ditto for that legendary dataless SMG, or that one legendary shield which provided tens of thousands of shields while dropping boosters that increased gun damage for a period. Then you have options like a legendary Maliwan SMG that doesn't consume ammo if you have overshield and can effectively shred if you build into it. Now, if only all the legendary perks actually told me what they do rather than hoping that I'll just try death from above and believe it's going to do something compared to every other grenade combination. Run and gun, and glide and dash. Say what you will about Borderlands 3, and I could say more than enough, but the gunplay and movement were pretty good. That carries forward in Borderlands 4, but with many more expanded options. Grappling is one of the bigger additions. Beyond more mobility, hoisting an explosive or similarly unstable element container to toss at enemies never gets old, even if it becomes non-viable as you venture further into the game. I was more impressed with the glide pack, which allows for hovering through the air for as long as the gauge lasts and even mid-air dashing. It's limited in the early goings, but still strong, and using it in conjunction with the grapple to quickly reposition or hover around enemies as you rain fire and other assorted projectiles feels great. The same goes for the guns and how they feel. It's still no Destiny, but the actual act of firing weapons or flinging a throwing knife into an enemy's dome feels pretty good. Some alternate firing modes could use a bit more oomph, but as it stands, the actual shooting is solid. Gearbox also does a great job with its enemy variety, whether you're dealing with the Order troops who can rewind to earlier points when in danger, or the Rippers with their bandit-like demeanors and various cybernetic augments. Have you ever fought against a bandit who attacks by breakdancing? You will, and that's not even getting into the wildlife, from the maulers that rush you to the pangolins that roll around and launch spikes. Granted, I had some iffy moments with snipers and giant enemies who charged you. No matter how high my level was, health or damage, my resistance, they always dealt a set percentage of damage, which seemed abnormally high. Maybe it was to encourage the new rep kits, even if their perks and healings should serve as better motivation. There's also a new enemy type that feels annoying, initially because of the precision required for targeting weak spots to render it vulnerable. It didn't feel as oppressive as I thought it would in the post-game after obtaining better weapons, but some slight adjustments to avoid tedium in the story might be required. As for the bosses, without diving into spoilers, the important story fights are obviously the ones that benefit from the most unique mechanics. Then you have the primordial Vault Guardians, who feel like the most epic, even if their overall complexity is a touch lower. The optional bosses found in the many side activities are a notch below both, but at least have some unique gimmicks. Keep an eye out for that double or even triple spawn. Then you have the likes of Orbulus. Given how essential farming bosses are, it's nice that most of them are distinct, even if they're not particularly challenging. We're in the endgame now. Of course, the most contentious aspect of a looter in this day and age is the endgame, especially with the mixed reactions to Mayhem mode in Borderlands 3. Ultimate Vault Hunter mode is a far better initiative, although it also has some shortcomings that should be addressed sooner rather than later. The idea after finishing the story is that everything levels up and becomes more challenging throughout Kairos. 2 new activities, the weekly wildcard mission and Moxie's weekly Big Encore, become available alongside Maurice's Black Market. The weekly wildcard takes a campaign mission and throws on some modifiers, like every enemy death creating a black hole that explodes, and higher level threats with a guaranteed legendary as a reward. Moxie's weekly Big Encore lets you rematch a specific boss for Iridium to increase their chances of dropping legendary loot. The Black Market is a single vending machine that changes locations weekly. Once located, you can purchase a single legendary and it goes on cooldown. Sometimes this cooldown could be bypassed after a period, and other times it allowed me to access the menu, but I couldn't buy anything before it went back on cooldown. The core concept of a Xur-like vendor in Kairos, who has way more charisma, otherwise makes perfect sense. My first issue is that these aren't new activities per se, you're essentially repeating older content. While the modifiers and tougher enemies can spice up the wildcard missions slightly, there are no other changes. A single legendary as a reward also doesn't feel worthwhile, especially since you could, check the vending machines, participate in the weekly Big Encore, or take your chances farming a Vault Guardian. There's also the fact that only one weekly wildcard mission is available constantly. The same goes for weekly big encore bosses. I can understand the logic behind the latter, even if upping the weekly number to 3 instead of 1 wouldn't put the biggest dent in player metrics, but for the former, some more options are desperately needed. Otherwise, some newish activities can be attempted in the endgame, including auger mines, order bunkers, and drill sites. The first two are more like mini-dungeons with light platforming and puzzle solving, respectively, while the latter is more horde-focused. All of them culminate in a boss fight. Again, these aren't new content, as much as accessible content due to their high level requirements, and attempting them immediately upon unlocking UVHM isn't recommended because of how odd the scaling becomes. Enemies in the overworld match your level, except when they don't at places like silos, utterly destroying you in the whole process. When you're still obtaining uncommon and rare gear alongside epics while scrounging for legendaries, it can take some recalibrating to understand why this is all happening. Specializations help even the odds, functioning similarly to Guardian ranks but offering unlockable passive skills that can be equipped. Even if there's some grinding to obtain some of the better choices, they feel incredibly worthwhile. 30% damage reduction based on the fullness of my health or shields, whichever's higher. Yes, please. At times, 4 slots won't feel enough, but the power behind each choice, or the majority of them, makes them significant. It ensures that experimenting and adjusting things, as with your skill trees when leveling up, makes the build crafting that much more enjoyable, even in the endgame. Now, aside from hitting max level, finding legendaries, and putting together a build, the usual action RPG fare, the grind mainly involves progressing through UVHM's tiers by completing challenges, which all require slaying a boss in that tier, then completing the required wildcard mission, different from the weekly wildcard, to progress to the next. Simple, perhaps a bit too much so, but at least it encourages battling bosses that you may not have fought till now, and interacting with the bunkers, drill sites, mines, and even some quests. I'm a bit miffed about not being able to filter out rares and uncommons in the endgame, even if they can sometimes provide a decent damage increase. Listen, I don't need all epics or legendaries all the time, but if you're giving me lower rarity loot that isn't an upgrade in some fashion, just skip the middleman and convert it to cash. The other endgame system to engage with is firmware, which provides set bonuses if you collect the corresponding pieces. I haven't really had much to really min-max with it, but the options available feel like bonuses, augmenting rather than outright defining your build. While they provide that extra bit on top, you can also make do without them, which I like. That being said, being able to transfer firmware between the same types of equipment feels like an unnecessary layer of RNG on top of everything else. Overall, the endgame is a significant step up from Borderlands 3. I just wish there were something after reaching UVHM Tier 5. Returning to base after completing the required wildcard mission and not even getting so much as a spoken word? That felt weird. Performative behavior. Perhaps the biggest hurdle to my enjoyment, at least initially, is the performance on PC. You've probably seen Randy Pitchford saying that it's almost impossible on minimum spec systems. Between compiling shaders for new locations and my CPU not being up to snuff, sun's getting real low, my beloved Core i5-11400, there were a lot of stutters to deal with, even while playing at mostly medium settings at 1440p on an RTX 4060 and 32GB of RAM. Knocking it down to 1080p, enabling frame generation and swapping to DLSS balanced help, but there were still stutters, even slight pauses that hampered the experience despite hitting 60 FPS more often than not. Subsequent updates improved things enough that DLSS quality is now possible. Stutters are even less frequent than before, but the shader compiling process is still something you need to deal with, sometimes even while fast traveling. Even with all those caveats, I found the overall visual quality to be quite good. The detailed and admittedly sick-looking enemy designs, the immense scale of Kairos environments, and sleek cell shading made it easy to forgive the admittedly limited-looking animations from NPCs. No rest for the wicked. Borderlands 4 won't exactly rewrite the action RPG looter formula, and it doesn't necessarily overhaul the core gameplay loop that sticks out in an age of deterministic crafting, extensive endgame systems, and whatnot. And as enjoyable as exploring the world of annihilating baddies can be when you're not experimenting to find the next game-breaking build, there are more than ifs and buts to keep it from offering something truly iconic like, say, Borderlands 2. Nevertheless, it certainly feels like Gearbox has emerged from the specter of the second game, lending a contemporary feel to the franchise without sacrificing everything that makes it unique. Borderlands 4 is as much of a comeback as it is a step forward. Whatever that means for the narrative's future, it's an enjoyable experience for longtime fans and looter-shooter enthusiasts alike. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell. And let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.